from happening because you caught it in time. And the other part is that when you get a checkup, if you got diabetes because you had too much sugar, too much starches, you're drinking, you're having fun, you're not thinking about it, your sugar levels are through the roof. You could see these things before it happened. You go to an event and you think everything is all right because you feel good. You're drinking, the sugar levels is at 900. You don't even know it. And you're walking around because sugar's sneaky. Sugar, as well as, high blood pressure. You could at least know another artist. I won't say his name on here, but just the other day, his blood pressure 217 over 117. When he got to the hospital, they said they don't even see how he's still here. And they gave him the medication and he didn't know it. He started getting a little bit of a headache. And then after that, he said it got so bad he went to the doctor. But this is my point. You want to know these things so you can control them. And the last one is also getting a colonoscopy. And the reason why is because that's the sneakiest one. That's the sneakiest one. You get a polyp and now you got colon cancer, or you think you may have it and you don't. There's another friend of mine. He has a lot of money. He deals with oil wells and all of this stuff. We kept asking him, you should go get checked, brother. He said, my stomach is bothering me. I said, yeah, why don't you just go get a checkup? Nah, man, nah. Look at my new car. Look at my house. Look at the diamonds I got on. One day it got so bad he went and got it checked out. And he found out that he had colon cancer. And then now he has to get his colon removed. And nowadays trying to see if they can help him, but I don't know what stage it's in. But the money don't make a difference now. You see what I'm saying? See, and that's what we get mixed up in. Everybody's chasing the money so much that they don't think about their health. They don't think about you're not going to enjoy none of this if you're not healthy. You're not even going to have fun with your family, with your kids, your grandchildren, your mom, your dad. So those three things to me are very important when it comes to men because I think if you get checked up, you'll be able to find out anything that's going on. And if you do these tests, because a colonoscopy is every 5 years or so. And, I think the prostate is every year. And a lot of people are getting prostate cancer at a younger age now than ever before. So that's my answer. And hopefully nobody is offended by my answer, but it's the truth, and even when you're looking at high blood pressure or diabetes, you can have a stroke. People don't know you can have a stroke from either one. So to avoid that, if you get checked up and you see that there's a problem, you could do some dietary changing, or you could take some medication until you get the dietary part under control. But you could change your life just by getting checked up.
So thank you again so much, Doug. I'm going to repeat those. First, get a annual checkup. And again, depending on what your health status is, you may need one, every 6 months. Two, get your prostate exam annually. The digital exam, the one with the finger, that one is one of the most effective. You could also, again, get it done by blood and get what's called a PSA, but ultimately you're still going to have a digital exam. So you might as well just get that one first. And then get a colonoscopy. And this is true. Everything that he's saying for men is same thing applies for women. But definitely get the colonoscopy. Everybody absolutely should get that. And as you mentioned, the last thing that you mentioned is that prostate cancer as well as colon cancer occurs at earlier ages in black people. And so we absolutely should pay attention to our health. And as Doug did, he had a friend who didn't feel well or a friend that was having symptoms. When you have someone that that's having symptoms that are unusual, encourage and support that person going to the doctor. And when they say no, it's like, that's okay. I will take you there. So do whatever you can to be supportive and caring and loving to people that are having symptoms, because symptoms represent something going on in your body that needs to be taken care of.
That's right.
So again, thank you so much, Doug. It's about time
Thank
for
you.
us to
All right, so we have our own. Okay, good. Thank you, Mike. We have our own empowerment counseling group here with Landon and Andre. Well, Landon Lee and Andre Griggs. I know there's two more. Kim Bird, Latrenda Washington, and Anthony Wilson. Those are our part of empowerment counseling group. I'm going to let them say who they are, but I asked them to come out. We want to do tips for the entire family, men, women, children. What are some ways we can decrease stress? How do we recognize stress? So I'm going to let Landon take it away from here, and then at 1 o'clock, he'll send you back, And you guys can finish up any sessions. We'll start back the men and women's health sessions, and we're gonna have some more raffles, okay? Thank you.
All right, thank you, Don. Thank you, everyone, for. Thank you, thank you. Again, my name is Dr. Landon Lee. I am the Clinical Director of Empowerment Counseling Group. We've actually been in business about 5 years, started back in 2018. Whoa. Of course, we have several therapists that work with us. Andre is one. He'll give you more information about himself. We have LaTrenda Washington and Anthony Wilson, who are members here, but they are all trained therapists, licensed therapists in the state of Georgia. And we're just here to kind of share a little bit on mental health, and we're going to hopefully be able to impact you in some way. So it look like I got most people on this side, so I'm gonna be looking over here mostly. I try to look over there every now and then. But anyway, we're delighted to be here, and let me just say, first of all, I guess I need to give you a little bit more about who I am. I am the clinical director. I'm a licensed professional therapist. I'm trained in trauma therapy, trained in we're working with all adverse populations to include adults, children, families, and couples. So if there's a need that you may have, or you may see family members or friend, please let us know. We have brochures here and then a table in the back, so feel free to look at that. Our brochures will give you more information on each therapist and kind of let you know about them. Now, we're supposed to be out of here by 1 o'clock, and I'm just going to tell you the information we have is a lot of content, and I'm going to tell you it's very difficult, next to impossible, to go through any extensive mental health type of training within an hour. I work with a group called Faith-Based Mental Health Initiative, and we do 12-hour trainings. And so we still could go on. So I can tell you all the impact of it. So we're going to kind of just touch the surface on some things. Depending upon the time, I couldn't get everything in that I wanted to get in. But towards the Q&A part, we can probably talk a little bit more about some things, depression, anxiety, more about suicidality. But we're going to go ahead and jump in a little bit and hopefully be able to impact you. Now I'm going to do an experiment. Ron, what you need? You got that look on me. Stand the mic. Okay, I'm cool with that. Okay. We got to stand the mic because we're streaming today as well. So, but anyway, so those are the objective here, and you'll understand why that's important as we go along. So before I get started, I'm going to do Joel Osteen's. Joel Osteen said you should always start with a joke. So I'm going to give a joke, and I'm going to see now. If it ain't funny, y'all laugh anyway, okay? I'm preferencing this. Now I found this joke. I saw it on Facebook. Y'all may have already heard it. So if you heard it, laugh anyway, okay? All right. So it was a young man that looked up, and he was having a conversation with God. And the conversation was, God, so how long is 1,000,000 years? And God says, about a minute to me. He said, okay, God. Well, tell me, how much is $1,000,000? Oh, So it's about a penny to me. I said, okay. God, may I have a penny, please? God said, give me a minute. Y'all will get that on the way home. You got it. All right, and there's a reason I did that. I'll tell you that a little bit later if I don't forget. But anyway, we're going to get started here. And again, our purpose here is to kind of deal with aspects of mental health. And when we're talking about mental health, there's a lot of pieces of it, as I said, that we would not even begin to have time to go through. But as we look at it, we understand we're talking about families. Many family members may struggle or tend to understand or misinterpret behaviors that indicate presence of either psychological disorder or just mental health struggles in general. A lot of times we see behaviors that are going on, we don't understand it, and not understanding that it may be something more significant. A myriad of emotions experienced among family members may include stress, anxiety, worry, fear, helplessness, depression, frustration, resentment. That's just a small list. Another piece that's not up there is a piece called hopelessness. And we're going to get more into that in just a second. Sometimes we can be at a place where we can feel like giving up. I feel hopeless. There's no answer. I'm in a place where I can't function, I can't understand, and it becomes a very, very frustrating state, and we'll talk about that some more. But one of the things about this, before we get into it, what I wanted to do in getting started, I wanted us to kind of talk about this subject, because this sometimes paralyzes us. The stigma of mental health treatment in churches. In churches and also in African American communities. But a lot of times we have areas where we are hesitant to seek mental health treatment. Why is that? Because sometimes we'll say, well, prayer is the answer. Well, prayer is the answer. We'll say, well, you got to have faith. And you do. You need to have faith. As a Christian, you need to have faith. Or sometimes we will say, mental illness is from demons. That's, we may not say that much around here, but that, when people get to a place where they're dealing with schizophrenia, they're dealing with a lot of different hearing sounds and hearing noises, seeing things, you say that's just a demon. You're demon possessed. And then the Bible tells us in Philippians to be anxious for nothing. So we feel like, okay, we shouldn't be anxious. So we just need to pray it out. We need to get moved. But what we have to do, we have to look at this concept of mental health in a way that is congruent with what God's will is. So say, for instance, sometimes we say prayer is the answer. Well, I'm going to tell you, if one of you all start having significant chest pains today, I want you to start praying, but calling 911 at the same time. Because what that prayer would do is hopefully give you some insight as to what's going to be the best approach that you should have. And having faith is to understand that I got to have faith that God is with whomever it is that I'm having to seek treatment for whatever it is that I'm dealing with. And then we talk about Philippians 4, about being not anxious. But I know a man that was real anxious at one time. Do anyone know who I'm talking about? Jesus. Jesus was very anxious. Even though he knew his task, he knew why he was here, he knew his purpose, but when the time came, he said, Father, take this cup from me. He was sitting there dealing with sweat, like blood coming from his face, and he was just very, very anxious about it, but he didn't let the anxiety rule him. He said, but not my will, but your will be done. So the point is not that we will not experience these things. Paul is not telling us in Philippians that we can't have anxious moments. He's just saying don't allow the anxiety to control your movement. And so there are different ways and different things that we will do in order to kind of get to that. But then there's challenges for people of faith in order to seek out mental health treatment. A couple of these challenges of this is that a fear of appearing weak. If I admit, we were just having this conversation here. We were just having this conversation where we talk about, especially us men, I don't know how your conversations may have gone in your sessions today, but many of us, especially African-American men, we're in situations where we have always been in the position of having to appear strong, having to be the one that, don't break. And at this point, so because of that, we can't show our areas of weakness, our areas of anxiety, our areas of depression. We gotta, I'm okay, everything good, I'm fine. And we move, and the point being is that when you're in that particular state, these are the areas where things can build up and build up and build up and build up until the point that you feel as though you can't take it anymore. And guess what? Suicide is prevalent in the churches. Suicide is prevalent in the churches, and one of the reasons it's so prevalent is because we choose not to talk about it. There's a stigma on it. There have been people that have taken their lives from this congregation. So it's not just them. It's just not those folks. We are dealing with this. Ministers all over the brotherhood are dealing with these types of issues and stressors that are taking place. So sometimes it's about fear of appearing weak. Have you noticed the culture that we've created in the churches is that you rarely ever see leaders come down for prayer. They will occasionally, but rarely, and guess what? They're probably dealing with more stress than you can imagine. All y'all coming at them every day? They are very, very overwhelmed, but it's a situation where if they come down, they may feel as though you don't respect them in the same way. You got my problem, how you gonna help me? But there's the last one, is afraid to show vulnerability. See, there's some power in being vulnerable. There's power in vulnerability. I'll share this story with you briefly. Many of you that are in this room right now remember when my wife and I came down a few years ago and shared the story of our son that had some legal problems. And yeah, we were probably like everybody else. We want to keep our little story to ourselves and figure it out on our own and a whole bunch of things. But there's a saying that when your pain becomes greater than your fear, then you stand up and do something. So we decided we want to be vulnerable. We just want the mercy of God. We came down and asked for prayer, asked for support, asked for mercy from God, asked a lot of different things, and guess what happened? You guys showed up and showed out. When it was time for his legal case to come place, you all packed the courtroom. It blew the judge's mind. He didn't know what was going on. But guess what? That wasn't the only thing that happened. What also happened is, after we exposed our area of vulnerability, one by one, different folks came up to us and said, I'm going through the same thing. I'm dealing with some of the same issues. It may not have been the exact same thing, but it gave them the freedom to be vulnerable. And understand there's power in being vulnerable. There's power because you're showing the fact that you have some level of humanity. You're struggling just like everyone else. So to kind of help us understand that, we're going to look at a few examples of that and see if we can gain some understanding about that. First, let's look at our buddy Job. We know Job from the Bible. We understand Job was a perfect man, as God said, and we know he was human, so he wasn't literally perfect, but that's how God described him. And God put Job up on a platform and asked the devil, have you considered my servant Job? And we know the story of how Job lost everything, how he went through whatever and he was stripped of everything. And I'm going to tell you, many of you today, because you haven't lost enough, you may be walking around feeling like you're a top dog in the Christian walk. But just as you are stripped, as you lose family members, as you lose finances, as you lose jobs, as you lose a lot of things, you become just as vulnerable as Job. And notice what Job said in chapter 3 after he had gone through his losses. Job says, afterward, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. And Job said, may the day on which I was to be born perish. He said, let's go all the way back on that day when somebody thought I needed to be born. Let that day perish, as well as the night which said, a boy is conceived. Whatever, and he's actually framing this at God. At the point that you decided that this boy is going to come into a world, let that day just disappear. Then he says in verse 4, may that day be darkness. May God above not care for it, nor light shine on it. Just let that day just disappear. And so that's how he's dealing with depression. He's just dealing with this whole point of, I just, wish I never existed. And then he continues in verse 11, he says, why did I not die at birth? So if I got to come, when I come into the earth, why didn't I just die? Why did I not die at birth? Come out of the womb and pass away. Why did I just not come in and just go ahead and pass away? Why were the needs there in front of me? Why was the midwife or whoever made the delivery, why were they there? Why were they even there for me? And why the breasts that would nurse me? Why would my mother or whomever, why did they give me nourishment? Why didn't they just let me die? For now I would have lain down and been quiet. In other words, I would have just passed away. I would have slept then. I would have been at rest. So now he's not saying it, but he's saying, at this point, I wish I was dead. So if Job can go through this as perfect as God described him, what makes you think that you can't be at a space of vulnerability just like Job? Then lastly, in chapter 3, 26, 25, for what I fear comes upon me, and what I dread encounters me. I am not at ease, nor am I quiet, and I am not at rest, but turmoil. So not only is he dealing with extreme depression and thoughts of death and hopelessness, he's also dealing with anxiety. I'm here, I'm not at rest, I'm just overwhelmed. So I'm just trying to give you examples of individuals from the Bible that we trust that are dealing with some things just like you and I. Well, if you don't accept Job, let's look at someone else. Look at Elijah and let's look at David. Okay? And we know who Elijah was. Elijah was one of the greatest prophets he was a bold prophet. He was the one that walked out, and he was the one that turned around and challenged all the prophets of Baal. He says, okay, come on, y'all, come on. If y'all so bad and good, then I want you all to create fire on this altar here. Let's see who's going to do what we're going to do. And they did all the hooping and hollering and whatever else they want to do, and they could not create fire. So Elijah got up, told them to put water all over the altar, do whatever you want to do, drown it as much as you can, and then we know the results. Elijah prayed to God and fire came down. So he was a bold prophet, but notice what happened. After he did all of that, he made somebody in power angry. He got somebody upset with him, Jezebel. And Jezebel, a woman scorned, you better look out. And he got a little afraid. And this powerful man ran away. And notice what he says in 1 Kings 19. Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servants there. So he came and he walked on by himself. While he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, he came to a broom bush and sat down under it and gave and prayed that he might die. Here he's coming, he's saying, Lord, let me die. He said, I have had enough, Lord. Take my life. I am no more better than my ancestors. Take my life. Now, this does not indicate that he was necessarily having suicidal ideations, but he certainly had thoughts of dying and wanting to leave. Then he laid down under the bush and fell asleep. So here, again, things can get so bad. You know, you think you may not be there, but let you lose your job. Let you lose your home. Let you lose, some family members. Let you become homeless. Let some things happen in your life that you don't know how you're going to respond and act upon that. So let's understand that these are some things that can significantly impact us. Then let's look at David. We know who David is. David is the man after God's own heart. We know David was the giant slayer. We know he was the greatest king that came through the Bible. But David, after he had sinned with Bathsheba, and then also having her husband Uriah killed, he was consumed with guilt. Notice what he says in Psalms 38. For my guilty deeds have gone over my head. Like a heavy burden, they weigh too much for me. My wounds grow foul and fester because of my foolishness. How many of us have been there? How many of us have been in a situation where we've done some things we're not proud of? Whether it was adultery, fornication, gambling, being promiscuous, whatever it is, some things that we've done that we're not proud of, and guilt is weighing us down. He says, I've bent over and greatly bowed down. I go in mourning all day long, for my sides are filled with burning, and there is no healthy part in my flesh. So he's consumed with this guilt, this anxiety, with this depression. My soul is going down in mourning. He says, I feel faint and badly crushed. I groan because of the agitation of my heart. My heart is just agitated every time I wake up and think about it, and I see Bathsheba, and I don't see Uriah, and I know that all folks are looking at me. I'm just dealing with this stress and this anxiety. So if these men, Elijah, David, Job, can go through these types of expressions of mental health, anxiety, and depression, and thoughts of dying and things of that nature, who are we to feel that we can't do the same thing, that those same things aren't going to come upon us? So we need to understand that just because we are in the church, just because we have God and Jesus as our Lord and Savior, that we are immune to problems. These problems, and the point is that when we recognize and choose to allow Him to direct us in helping us solve those problems, that's when things become where God would have us. Well, let's talk about mental health treatment in the Bible. Proverbs writer says, where there is no guidance, the people fall. But in abundance of counselors, there is victory. So in other words, you don't need to try to hold on to this by yourself. Where there's no guidance, if you're too big, too whatever to get guidance from someone else, you're going to fall. But there's but in the abundance of counselors, there is victory. He also states, through overconfidence comes nothing but strife. If you think you got it all together, you don't need no help, I got it worked out, you're going to have problems. But wisdom is with those who receive counsel. So here the Bible is kind of trying to make us understand that sometime or somewhere along the way, you may need some support and you may need some help. Let's look at some examples of actually clinical therapy that is actually suggested from the Bible. Proverbs 27:4 says, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. That's kind of a philosophical component of what we call cognitive behavior therapy. We focus with what we call stinking thinking. In other words, when you're looking at your thought process may be off. Many therapists focus in on CBT, cognitive behavior therapy. The one that I ascribe to is narrative therapy, and it's explained or is illustrated to some degree in Romans chapter 7. Verse 17 says, "No longer I that do it, but sin that dwelleth in me." So what this is talking about, this is a concept of what we call externalization. See, many times when we go around and we're dealing with mental health challenges, we say things like, "I'm depressed." We say things like, "Well, I'm anxious." We say things like, "I'm bipolar," or "I'm schizophrenic." But your language is important. What you're doing is actually encompassing that diagnosis upon yourself. So it's how you look at it. So instead of saying that I'm depressed, I'm anxious, say things like, "I'm Landon, who's a thriving, vibrant individual that deals with some levels of depression, that deals with some anxiety, that struggles with schizophrenia." That's externalizing it. So we, as in Romans 7, he says, it's no longer I. It's not me. I'm a person that really is a good guy. Paul was dealing with, I'm a man, I believe in God, but I struggle with sin. Sin is something, I'm not sin, but I struggle with sin. So that's the externalization part. And then lastly, in Genesis 2:7 expresses a concept that's really near and dear to my heart: internal family systems. In verse 7, it says, "God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul." So when we're talking about internal family system, how many of you all here have seen the movie, either the current one or the one prior, Inside Out? Anyone here seen that movie, Inside Out? I got one hand. That's your homework assignment. 2 hands. That's your 3 hands. That's your homework assignment. Everybody in here is out now. It's the #1 selling movie in the world. It's an animated movie. It's a cartoon, animation. Your homework is to go see Inside Out. Inside Out 2 is out right now. The reason I'm telling you that is that what's happening here in internal family systems, what is showing you that is that we're made up a certain way. There is what we call a self-energy that's a part of us. I call that our soul and our spirit, the thing that God breathed into us. That's the essence of who we are. And there's something in that self that can instruct us on whatever it is that we need. But along with that, there are situations that happen in our lives. There's traumatic experiences sometimes people have. There just may be some things that happen in life that we may go through that is very overwhelming as such. And those become exile parts. They'll become parts that are just there, and they're wounded parts. And then we have other parts that try to protect those wounds. One of the protectors is called managers, and those managers will come in and they will be things like going, getting an education, exercising every day, reading, doing some things to help distract you from that pain that's going on the inside. Well, there are another type of protector called firefighters. And the reason they're called firefighters is because they try to put out the fire. It's hurting. The managers are proactive. The firefighters are reactive. You're in a crisis and I got to get some help right now. So the firefighters may be things like drugs, alcohol, promiscuous sex. It may be things like suicidal ideation, suicide itself. These are things, and the point is that in the movie Inside Out, you're going to find out that all these parts are important. They're playing a role in your life. The goal is to deal with that exile part, heal that part, so those parts don't have to have that role. So what I'm wanting you to see as we talk about this stuff is that there is biblical principles that kind of help encourage us to understand the need to get the support that we need when we need it. So I just wanted to open up with that and kind of give us that particular foundation. Now, as we move into this discussion about mental health, one of the areas, we're talking about families, we talked about various things, but our children are the ones that's suffering the most in a lot of ways. So I'm going to bring Andre up. He's going to introduce himself and kind of go through this aspect of our youth and some things that they're struggling with. Andre.
Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Great, great, great. We got to get some energy moving in here. I know you all been sitting down for quite some time. We really grateful that you came out to spend some time with us. So what I would like to do is take this opportunity to shift the focus from the family to dealing with the children, who, as Dr. Lee mentioned, probably in some ways suffer more than we do, and probably in some ways suffer more than we can ever imagine, right? So my name is Andre Griggs, and I'm a licensed professional counselor. Like Dr. Lee, I work with people throughout the lifespan. However, I typically focus on the individual, right? Children, adolescents, and mainly college students. Right now, I serve as the lead counselor at Georgia House College. I've been working in higher education for about 15 years now. So I use that, my love for working with that population, along with my prior experience as a teacher, particularly as a special education teacher, to really hone my skills and focusing on helping those particular individuals, because that's where my passion lies the most. So I want to start off by saying there's this quote by Stuart Leslie Goddard. A lot of y'all may not know who Stuart Leslie Goddard is, but it's better known as Adam Ant. So it's a famous English singer and musician, right? And what Adam Ant once said is mental health needs a great deal of attention. It's the final taboo, and it needs to be addressed, or should I say, it needs to be faced and dealt with. So in essence, I think that correlates with what Dr. Lee was talking about in terms of this whole stigma around mental health, right? And the idea that it's not something we need to talk about, let's pretend that it doesn't exist, but the reality, it does exist. The reality is it's existed, as Dr. Lee mentioned, since the beginning of time, because he's provided illustrations of people in the Bible who have suffered from mental health issues. So, generally speaking, black youth, as you can see, are facing a major health crisis. And contrary to popular belief, some people may think, oh, okay, they're dealing with physical health issues, maybe like I do. Some of them got, some hypertension going on, which we know there's some kids who have that. Some of them may have some diabetes going on. We know there's some kids did that. And unfortunately, there's some youth who also have been diagnosed and subsequently succumbed to death due to cancer. So while all those things are true and that these are serious matters, the matter that I think the youth most impacted by is mental illness, right? And we know that sometimes mental illness can bring on these physical health issues that sometimes we experience. For instance, if you're dealing with anxiety, for instance, which, causes some people to really feel nervous and anxious, guess what? It can increase the heart rate, right? So much so that if you're not careful, the next thing you know, you might be subject to a heart attack, right? So there's a correlation between the mental health and the physical health that sometimes I think is overlooked. But my hope is that after today's presentation, you would kind of see, as Dr. Lee mentioned, that all of our body unit is important. Just like, the head, our bodies are attached. I got our heads, we have our neck, they all serve a purpose and they all serve a role. So when we focus on one and neglect the others, it's not in our best interest. So when you talk about the youth, the National Alliance on Mental Illness defines mental illness as a condition that affects one's thinking, feeling, or behavior. That's the definition of mental illness as relates to the National Alliance on Mental Illness. So given that, when you think about the youth, and you think particularly about these common disorders, right, such as schizophrenia, anxiety, depression, and bipolar disorder, these are common mental health illnesses, mainly the first two, the anxiety and depression part, right? So you have that, and you have the idea that is not uncommon, given those common mental health disorders, it is equally common for youth, generally speaking, to experience some of those, right? So, again, my background being in special education, most of the kids I dealt with had some sort of behavior issue. But some of their behavior issues were rooted in anxiety or depression from various things they may have experienced early on in their lives, or guess what? They were currently experiencing. And so they were learning to cope with that the best way they could, with or without parents' assistance. So when you think about that, you know, these mental disorders, they can affect, as it states, our youth, leading some of them to being considered suicide or experience suicide-like behaviors because they become overwhelming from them. And so you have research that suggests, as you can see there, you know, there have been reports by the CDC and other reputable resources that suggest that, guess what? You have suicide is the second leading cause of death among black children ages 10 to 14, and the third leading cause of death among black adolescents ages 10 to 15. So I'm 15 to 19. So as you can see, it is a serious dilemma that some of us may want to deny or not think about, but the reality is when we do that, the only person that seems to suffer are our youth. So the purpose of my presentation is simply this, is to provide, or should I say, examine and shed light on the significance of mental health as it relates to the suffering of our black youth, and to also be able to consider the numerous factors that serve as barriers, I would like to say, right, to our youth seeking treatment or being reluctant to seeking treatment. And believe it or not, a lot of it doesn't really so much have to do with the youth as it has to do with us as the parents or the guardians. You know, I know I was brought up, Dr. Lee mentioned this earlier, how some of us may have been brought up during a time where if you were a child and you seemed to get in trouble a lot in school, you know, your parents would think, we'll whip it out. That's the devil speaking to you. We're gonna take care of that right now. You know, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna whip it out. You know, and we're gonna keep whipping it out until we're convinced that guess what, it's gonna come out. But then my question is, what happens when some of y'all may have experienced this, or you may other people? What happens when the behavior doesn't change? What happens with that youth or those youth that you call sort of spanking or whatever you want to call it? You've been doing this now for 5 years. And it hadn't done on you that, either it hadn't done on you that it's not effective, or you just that determined to prove that it is effective, and it's just going to take a little longer than you anticipated. So when I hear things like that, while I understand this tradition passed down, the first thing that comes to my mind is stinking thinking. It's distorted thinking. It's stupidness. The idea, notion that you can spank a child to the extent where, you know what, they will act right. Now, you're going to have some children who do act right. But guess what? It's not going to be because of the right thing. It's not going to be because they know what's better. Guess what's going to be? It's because they fear you. So now you put fear in there, and you want to also them to be, you serve as a source that they can come to in the event they need help. I don't think so. I'm going to come to you as a source. Now, I'm not saying all children are like that, because it's not true. You're going to have some who just sort of follow in place and do those things. All I'm trying to do is that somebody suggests that some of the ideology or the things that we've been taught as being effective, in some ways they can, but in other ways they're being ineffective because you don't see what's going on inside as to those things you're doing to the child. Those very situations, circumstances in terms of those spankings might lead a child to experience anxiety and depression. You know, there's been research to support that, you know, that can actually cause post-traumatic stress. Yeah, that's what it can do for some kids, right? So these are things that we just need to be conscientious of, right? So that's my focus, is to examine and shed light on it, and to show you how, despite the gradual, or should I say speedy decline in some of youth daily functioning, some of them are oblivious to the fact that, guess what, they have some serious issues going on where they need to seek help, just as the parents or the guardians are oblivious to that. Or should I say a denial? So there's some statistical data on Black youth mental ill health that really needs to be brought up. This information might be very alarming and astounding to you all, but I think it speaks to what I just mentioned in terms of the situation our youth find themselves in dealing with home environment and school struggles, right? So while research is good on identifying or sharing light on some of the things, what's being overlooked is the idea of why this is occurring. Meaning we're not looking at the barriers or the factors that may be contributing to that, right, as to why they're not seeking help. And again, most oftentimes, it's not that the youth are not seeking help because they don't want help, it's because they don't have the support at home in terms of adults or God listening to them say something's not right, something's wrong, or whatever language they speak to try to convey to us that, hey, I need help. So I know you can't see that on the screen, so what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna read some of the statistical data, just a little bit, right? Give you some examples of some things that transpire or that the data speaks to in terms of our Black youth. So according to Mental Health America, Blacks and/or African Americans are less likely than white people to die from suicide at all ages. However, Black or African American teenagers are more likely to attempt suicide than white teenagers, 9.8% versus 6.1%. Statistical data 2. According to SAMHSA, SAMHSA is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And so according to SAMHSA's 2018 National Survey on Drug Use and Health, serious mental illness rose among all ages of Black or African American people between the dates of 2008 to 2018. So over a span of 10 years, right? There was an increase in mental illness among all age groups in the Black community. So that means we all impacted in some way or another. The third statistical data suggests that despite rates being less than the overall US population, major depressive episodes increased from 9% to 10.3% in Black or African American youth ages 12 to 17. And then you get another 6.1% to 9.4% in young adults. So there's statistical data that speaks not only to the youth in terms of suicide, but also to most of our age groups. But again, I'm focused on the youth because that's what we're taking to address right now, right? Now, the mental health struggles of Black youth, see that the cognitive, emotional, and as you can see, the behavior concerns. We talked a little bit about those, right? They see that because there's these environmental factors that play a huge role in this entire process we call the mental health suffering of Black youth. And those environmental factors can be factors such as poverty, the drug use. It can also be, the environment itself in terms of the community violence, as well as domestic violence, which is huge, we all know, generally speaking, within the Black community household, right? So when you think about these particular factors, right, to me it's not surprising why, when I'm approaching kids thinking about the cognitive and, the emotional behavior piece, why some of them can't really attune to that. Why me just focusing on that is ineffective. because you got some kids who are dealing with life on life circumstances. As some people might mention, life be life. And so guess what? Their life is life, because this is their reality in terms of where they live. And so these are the same children we're expecting, generally speaking, to go to school, to sit down, to listen, to pay attention, to focus, when the reality is they probably thinking about what they got to deal when they get back home. So they don't care anything about school per se. And not literally don't care, but they got so many other things going on that's going to take a backseat. No different from us sometimes. You know, we got bills and stuff. Some of us working 2 or 3 jobs. And so we're not thinking about, other things that might be important. Coming to church, or let me make sure that I get my blood pressure checked, and let me make sure, guess what? Let me sort of do a mental health check-in myself and kind of see how things are going. We're trying to survive. That's what it's called. We're trying to survive. So just like we're trying to survive, black youth are trying to survive, right? So what I'm going to do is, as a result of these concerns and others, these particular issues create barriers for our black youth seeking mental health service. They actually become reluctant to seek those services. Not necessarily, I don't think it's because they really don't want help. I really do think it's because of the other things that seem to be that are more pressing, right? The things that are more important to them, because, again, it's a reflection of what's going on in their everyday life. And the last thing they're thinking about, I need help for dealing with anxiety or how I'm feeling, because again, they think about their day-to-day struggles. So what we're going to do, we're going to look at the barriers that are classified in 3 categories. You have individual barriers, you have interpersonal barriers, and then you have the structural barriers, right? And I think when I talk about these different barriers, you will begin to kind of see the uniqueness of what goes into, I guess, our black youth, the things that kind of go in their mind in terms of why they may be reluctant to seek help, other than the fact they may not receive the support at home. So when you think about these individual barriers, very similar to the barriers we might have, denial. The idea that, guess what, I don't have a problem, right? Or the idea that the problem is not as serious as one might think. It really ain't that bad. If I just, smoke a little weed, or if I just, go for a swim, or hang out with some friends, or if I just find other ways of sort of releasing that, I can sort of distract myself from my reality. And for some of them, it's their perceived reality. They don't really think that's really happening. So they don't say, no, this is really real. This is what's going on. So you got that, right? And you got the idea of financial hardship. The idea that I'm living with parents or guardians who, guess what, may not have the financial means for me to receive the help I need. Just like they may not have the financial needs to take me to go see an ophthalmologist when I'm squinting in class and can't see the board. And when I don't think about moving toward the front of the room because I don't want possibly to draw attention to myself that I can't see. And not only can I not see, I got peers who are seeing that I can't see, and then I got to deal with the idea of not being able to get glasses and therefore sitting up at front still squinching my eyes day and night. So it's the embarrassment maybe that comes along with knowing I'm not going to get no glasses. Right? So that's a reality for some of our kids, right? So you got the denial, you got the hardship, financial hardship. You also got the reluctance, as they say, treatment refusal. So even in cases where parents are being supportive of our youth to try to get their kids help, kids may not want help. And part of the reason why the child may not want help is because they probably haven't heard anybody in the family talk about mental health before. Nobody else is seeking help, and I'm seeing mom and dad, fight every day, and I don't see them seeking no help. I guess it's okay for them to fight and not get help, but it ain't okay for me to go to school and act out. And I guess that is one of those embarrassment pieces for the family. So sometimes we think that kids are oblivious to what's going on in the household. We don't give them credit that they're more intelligent than we actually think they are. And just because they can't articulate certain thoughts and feelings doesn't mean they're not experiencing it. Right? So when you think about the things I just mentioned in terms of the individual barriers, you got denial, you have the hardship part, right? You have the treatment refusal, and then you have the other part that talks about what? Self-reliance. I like to say, I got this. You know what? I'm just pick myself up by my bootstraps because that's what I've heard in the household. Or I've heard mom and dad say, hey, boy, you better get up, girl, and do this thing. Ain't nobody got time for that foolishness. I work 2-3 jobs. And you think you got it bad? You better handle your business. Despite anything that's going on for this household, you better go to school, act right, get an education, because that's what we expect you to do. So the kid might interpret that as self-reliance. I got to learn how to deal with this on my own. I don't have supporting parents. I'm really reluctant to ask teachers because, again, what that's going to do, that's going to shed light on my parents. And my parents already told me they don't want no teachers, administrators calling over no foolishness. You don't need to be sharing any information about what's going on in this household with your teachers, your school counselor, administrators. Keep our names and everything's going on in the household out of your mouth. That's all business. So where's the youth going to go? Can't talk to a teacher. Can't talk to the school counselor, even though that's part of their job. Can't talk to the administrator. Well, who do I talk to? Can't talk to peers and say, because they're going through the same stuff. They ain't trying to talk about it. I get to the church, they don't really talk about it, so why would I bring it up? I'm not comfortable bringing it up because I haven't ever heard it discussed within the church. So why would I bring up a topic of discussion in an environment where I've never heard it? Or where I've never even received any inclination that it's okay to talk about. So that's what you have in terms of individual barrier. Interpersonal barrier, you got the stigma, which Dr. Lee has already mentioned in terms of the stigma around mental health. So, for example, the kid may say, yeah, I know I need help and all that, but guess what? If I tell my friends I think I need help, or my parents I think I need help, I got to deal with the probability of them saying, you crazy. Why do I have to deal with that probability? Because that is the language I've heard used in the household when it comes to talking about people who have mental health issues. You crazy. And boy, if it's one thing we don't tolerate in this house, is someone acting crazy. You ain't crazy, so stop acting like it. You got good sense. And if you're having a problem with that good sense, let me remind you of Sheila here, or whoever the belt name or whatever you use, to help you get right. So you got that stigma as a barrier in terms of interpersonal barrier. Then you have the idea of the shame and embarrassment, which are the same. I talked a little bit about that earlier. The shame of, embarrassment of going to school, knowing you got things going on, and knowing you can't talk to anyone about it because your parents have already said not to. And in some cases, the parents might have even threatened that if you say anything, you're going to get a whooping. If you say anything, and your whooping going to be so bad, we're not going to send you to school tomorrow because we don't want you reporting us to the, school social worker. So as you can see, everything becomes about the reputation of the family in terms of protecting that reputation at all costs, even if that means that the child has to suffer, right? So you got that piece of it. Then you have the fear and alienation by peers and social media. Again, the idea, if I tell anybody about these mental health issues or issue, I might not have any more friends. They might just kick me out the friend group. They might stop playing with me, stop associating with me. They nothing to do with me at all. And you think about the larger part of it, and I'll talk about this when we go to the next slide. When you think about one of our greatest needs as human beings, according to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is the need to belong. So if I have a need to belong, I mean, see myself as part of a community, as part of a group, then I definitely don't want to be ostracized because that's a need. So no, I'm not telling my peers. I'm not mentioning this on social media. Right? So you got that. Then you have the third barrier, the structural barrier. And the structural barrier deals with the lack of affordability to seek services. So the idea that even though the child may want help, guess what? They realize that they live in among parents or guardians who don't have the financial means to be able to do that. And you may say, well, how would they know that? Well, just think about it. Some of us probably grew up in households, you know, we ask for certain things. Boy, I ain't got no money for that. You know better than ask me that. Particularly in the single-parent households, where whether it's the father, mother, or aunt, or grandmother raising the kids and doing the best they can, don't be asking them for anything extra outside of, you know, bread and, you know, the things that they are offering you. Right? So no. So it's like, okay, so the lack of affordability, right? The lack of accessibility. Man, we live in a rural area. How I'm going to get to mental health? It's 50 miles away. Or better yet, we live in the city limits. But my parents or guardians don't have a vehicle. I said, well, the public transportation, we can't afford public transportation. So how do you get your parents or guardian get to the grocery store and all that? Neighbors. Ride a bicycle. Walk. That's how they get there, right? So you got that, lack of accessibility, lack of affordability. Then you have the lack of availability. So the idea that if I want to go seek help, where do I go? I live in this community. The nearest person who might be able to help me is 20 miles away. And I still have these other barriers I mentioned, transportation issues. Who's going to take me? How am I going to get back and forth from it? Who's going to listen to me long enough to know that I'm serious in terms of what's going on and be willing to take me? Right? And then you got the last but not least, and this applies to some of us, probably a lot of us, the mistrust. The mistrust of providers or the system. I ain't going to see them, you know, I've been to see 2 or 3 providers, and you know what, they ain't helped me yet. So no, I'm not going to see nobody else. I just deal with this on my own. Or the system. I go over there, why I can't find nobody who look like me up in here? Why I always got to deal with somebody who white or Asian? I don't understand that. And while I understand the importance of that, I really do. I empathize with people who that's truly a need. I'm more the perspective of I'd rather be receiving help of some sort than not receiving help. Because in my mind, that's better than not getting anything at all. I can work on this other part later. That's important, but I just want to be seen right now. Not saying it's not significant. I see someone who looks like me, but, you know, in my mind, I'm just trying to get help. And then the other thing I have is, if that's so much of an issue, why would that not be an issue in your job? You work around people who don't look like you all day, every day. That don't seem to bother you. I'm thinking if it did, you would have changed jobs. So I think some of this stuff is just, you know, we choose, right? I think we sort of pick and choose for convenience and just for argument's sake to not seek help at times. It gives us a legitimate excuse or we think a legitimate excuse not to get the help we need. Right? So you have the system part. And I'm not saying that the system is a perfect system. I'm not saying that there aren't flaws in the system, or that, the system, within the system there isn't racism or microaggression that exists. It exists. But so does the world we live in. This is our everyday life. This is our everyday life. So we got to figure out a way to sort of deal with it. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine about 2 weeks ago, and we were talking about race theory, critical race theory, and the idea of us as Black Americans living within a society where we're mistreated sometimes, or we're not considered equal, and how we really need to be intentional about voting, and because votes matter and they count. And I'm listening to him, I'm like, yeah, I'm in agreement with a lot of stuff he's saying. But where we disagreed was there was so much of what he was saying that focused on what other people are doing to us. The idea that, and I'm not saying that we're not victims of something, but that was the focus. The focus wasn't on let's create a balance in terms of what responsibility we have ourselves and how can we just try to work within a system, that's not for us, and do the best we can. So I brought up to him, I said, I struggle just like you do, like everybody else. But what helps me is reminding myself that when the country was founded, they didn't have me in mind. It wasn't founded, with me in mind. The last time I checked, the people who were making decisions during that time didn't even look like me. There was no person that looked like me. So it's not a surprise to me that there are times I'm treated the way I am, because, again, the Constitution didn't have me in mind. And so as we sort of talk about that, I brought it back present in terms of focusing back on what can we do for ourselves. We got our Black youth, we got ourselves, we got the community. And sometimes I think with our Black youth, they just need to know they matter. Right? Just like we deal with racism and different things on our job sometime, or the grocery store, they deal with some of that at school. They deal with some of that on the bus. They deal with some of those things even in the neighborhood if they're fortunate or privileged enough to live in neighborhoods where there are other people that don't look like them. They deal with that. And to me, that goes back to what I just said. The Constitution didn't have us in mind in the beginning. So they dealing with the same stuff we're dealing with, but yet we don't know that because they're not sharing that. And all the time, they're not sharing that because they listen to what we say is important in the household. And so when mental health don't come up, if, I'm treated like this don't come up in terms of yourself, then they assume that those are topics that are not up for discussion. Those things you just deal with yourself. Or we try to minimize the experience by saying, you don't even know what I had to deal with. You think you got it bad. This ain't nothing. To me, that's minimizing the experience. They can't help they born during this era and don't have to deal with some of the stuff you might have dealt with. That's not their fault. They don't have a choice in the matter. No more than you had a choice in the matter when you were born and I was born, right? So these are things that, again, that are very serious for our youth. So then when we move to this last slide, next to the last slide, that deals with what are some solutions? What are some things we can do, Andre, that may help our youth change this sort of, so we can, I guess, eradicate this sort of eradicate these issues, these struggles, mental health struggles that our youth are experiencing? Well, even though I have on here a mental health solution, I like to really say possible solutions. Because the truth is, don't know if this is going to work. May work for some, may not necessarily work for all. But the first thing is, I think approaching this from a Maslow hierarchy of needs perspective. Abraham Maslow was an American psychologist. And he figure is in humanist psychology. And he believes that, guess what, if we meet certain needs in human beings' life, guess what, they can move to the next level. So that first level is, at the bottom, is physiological need, food, clothing, shelter. If I got that going, if that need being met, then I move to the next need in terms of security, safety and security. That means employment, resources. I think y'all kind of know where I'm going with. So the idea is, guess what? If these basic needs are met, then I'm in a better position mentally, emotionally, to sort of deal with, and deal with some other things. But if I'm living in a community, I'm dodging bullets, and I'm being honest, or I'm eating the same thing, I'm eating, crumbs of food, you expecting me to go to school, and it don't work like that for some of us. Right? So that's what Maslow says. As you go through these things, talk about, love and belonging, we talked about earlier in terms of being ostracized, potentially by peers, if they talk about the mental illness. So that's us to have intimate relationships, friendships, and social connections. And then you go from there to self-esteem, where you feel good about yourself, confidence, achievement, you believe you can achieve, and you actually acquire achievement. Then you're looking at status, you're looking at respect about others, and other things. So these possible solutions. Right? Then you have the other solution in terms of teach, learn that it's okay to seek help and be okay. It's okay to not be okay. Second, teach, learn healthy boundaries, teaching our youth healthy boundaries. Teach and learn ways to manage stress and difficult emotions. These are some possible solutions for our youth who deal with mental illness, right? Or to reduce the likelihood they may infect. The other thing, listen more than you talk. That, as adults, listen more to the youth than we do talking. And then last but not least, check in regularly with the youth. Check in. And check in means, hey, how was school today? How's everything going? Any stressors going on? Your kind of situations that made you sad, made you angry? That's checking in. All right? And so in conclusion, the hope is, as you reflect back on the presentation, think about some of the things I mentioned, that becomes quite evident to you that Black youth mental health is a serious concern that we need to continue to address, despite the fact it's been addressed to some extent. There's still more work that needs to be done in this area. And the hope is also that we consider perhaps the most important thing we can do is to provide ongoing mental health education within our communities, and we need the church to reestablish itself or reassert itself as the primary pillar among Black communities. At one point, the church used to be the place you go and get all, most of your needs met, food, clothing, shelter, jobs, all of that stuff. Not so much now. All right? Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Andre, for that. Our time is really kind of at hand now, so I'm not going to really have the ability to go over the things as much as I wanted to do today. I just want to mention that I do want to give you a chance to ask any questions that you may have. So one of the things I was going to talk about is trauma, because trauma is significant and something that impacts us in a significant way. Basically, there's a concept of what we call implicit and explicit memory. Explicit memory is what you can remember on your own, but implicit memory are some things that may have occurred because of some experiences that you have. And I give you an example. Say if there was a young person that was traumatized as a child in some type of way, maybe they were molested or what have you, maybe by a stepfather or by a uncle or what have you. But what happens is that whenever that person comes to come to visit, they always brought candy. They had a pocket full of candy, they gave them candy, they gave whatever, and so that was what they had, but before the day was over, they were molested. Well, as an adult, what can happen is that you can be in a relationship and you can be going forth and you could have someone that was like, okay, I'm gonna have a great date night, I'm gonna make a nice time for my wife or for my girlfriend or what have you, and you go buy flowers and you buy some candy. And when you come and you thinking everything is wonderful and what have you, as you present your flowers, your present, and the candy, she reacts. She doesn't even know why she's reacting, because there's an implicit memory that triggers inside of her. So that's a trauma response that people are dealing with a lot of times. And when you just say, I don't know why that person is responding that way, then that's part of what happens here. So that's the trauma response. I'm not going to go through a lot of attachment. I wish I had time to kind of go through that, because we look at secure attachment, but a lot of us are dealing with some of those other areas of ambivalent, avoidant, and disorganized attachment. If you have questions about that, I'll come back and talk about it, but we don't have time to. I want you to be able to get back to the rest of your day. Wanted to talk about polyvagal system. Polyvagal system is basically designed and talked about your nervous system. It deals with the autonomic nervous system, and really part of the same things that I did earlier were connected to your autonomic nervous system. When I stood too close to my brother here, is basically our nervous systems were in conflict. So typically we try to make sure that we're engaged in a certain way. When I gave that poor joke at the beginning, it was to relax your nervous system, to connect with me in a certain way. That's the whole point of it. So in therapy, we're in a position where we try to make sure that we are connecting in a certain way. And once our nervous systems are connected, our nervous systems are considered co-regulators. And all of you, sometimes you may find when you're dealing with your children, your spouse, if you sit and you listen and you are a certain way and they're upset, you notice that they calm down, because you're helping, they're dysregulated and you're helping them regulate as such. So the polyvagal system deals with your right in here, your brain stem, and it goes on throughout your body as such, and certain things that's there. If time permits, after I give you the opportunity, I'll go into more about this, because there's three primary states that you're dealing with as far as your ventral vagus, your sympathetic nervous system, and the dorsal vagus. And dorsal is basically where you're shut down. Ventral vagus is where you want to be. Ventral is your happy place, and I'll just kind of show you this right quick. Ventral vagus is basically, I normally give a visual. I love going to the beach. I don't know if anybody else do, or if you have some other places, but that's my happy place. So that's where we want to be. But then there's certain things that happen that pushes us down into our sympathetic nervous system, where we get really agitated, and that's our survival mode and things as such. And then things can get so heavy that we drop down into dorsal. And dorsal is where we are depressed, we're shut down. It may be because of grief or because of whatever, that we're in a very, very shut down state. And then there's things that's called a vagus brake that kind of helps us navigate ourselves up and down through the system. I'll spend time elaborating on that more if anyone has questions about it. It's a very important piece. But I wanted to get to solutions. How do we address the issues that we're facing? First, it talks about developing a good mental health hygiene. Well, what is that? That's simply developing a plan, a process to generate positive mental health outcomes. So I think I heard Doretha earlier when you all were working out this morning, getting things going. She threw out there, put this on your calendar, do this every day, do certain things. So you have to be purposeful. We talk about in church always about reading your Bible, get a study time, get a prayer time. You have to be purposeful if you're going to be successful. Develop a daily routine to enhance your mental health, emotion, proper nutrition, diet, all of that. And then we said actual health hygiene process, oral cleanliness, and we'll show you an example of this. One is mindfulness, meditation, yoga, stretching, walking. Mindfulness is simply being in the present. It's simply when you're dealing with anxiety, you can't be stressed if you're in the present. You may have a situation where, oh, I'm worrying about losing my job, but if I'm sitting here, if I'm paying attention to this pew that has purple and green and has a smooth edge here, I'm focused there. I'm in the moment. I'm in this moment. I'm not worrying about what else may be happening. So that's what mindfulness does. It helps you meditate and focus on your breath, just a simple thing of breathing, as well as yoga. If anyone, I won't go into it, but yoga is a very, very, very powerful means of relaxation. So if you haven't done it, try it. I just say that. Stretching, walking. Stanford medicine study states that there's 3 primary areas. Any activity that brings on high levels of happiness, as long as you pay attention to it. So just like brushing your teeth. A lot of times, I know when I'm brushing my teeth, sometimes I have an electric toothbrush, so sometimes when I'm not paying attention, I'm just brushing my teeth. My hand behind my back. Why is my hand behind my back? I don't know. I guess because I don't need it, but that's where it is. So, but when you're paying attention to those things, it makes a difference. Focus on happy mind. Studies show that Americans spend half the time of their waking hours in a state of mindless wandering. Now, most of you all, I promise you, on your way here, you probably weren't thinking about your route. Your mind was 100 ways, because you know how to get here. You ain't got to try to, okay, where do I turn? Where do I go? Your mind just kind of wanders. So the goal is to try to get you into a state of mindfulness, not mindlessness. Studies also show that paying attention to the task at hand leads to higher level of happiness. If you focus on what you got to do in this moment, number one, you're spending more time and energy accomplishing that, and then that allows you to have some level of happiness because you'll reach your goal. Paying attention to smaller tasks can help us accomplish our larger goal. Paying attention to our 5 senses, staying with the activity of brushing, focus on the myriad sensory experiences associated with brushing your teeth. Feel the bristles against your gum. Notice the temperature of the water. Taste of the toothbrush. Notice the other hand we just talked about. And building a calmer brain. Studies shows that human attention span went from 12 seconds in 2002 to 8 seconds in 2015. So our attention span is decreasing. So we're not being able to stay focused for a very long time. Neuroplasticity, if I can say that word, that's basically the reshaping of the brain. Nervous systems has flexibility and can change how it functions and is structured. So the significance of that is, even though you may be struggling with something, you have the ability, God has given us ability to restructure whatever that may be happening in our brain. And then lastly, repeated activity can restructure the brain. So those things that we're talking about, like meditation, if you're a pianist or you're learning to play the piano or exercise, those are things that can help us restructure some of the functionality in our brain. So I'm sorry I rushed through that. We did, as I told you from the beginning, we didn't have enough time to really do all we want to do, but I do want to, I can go back to some of this if the questions are related to it, but I want to give you at least a few minutes before you have to go and do whatever else you have to do to propose any question to myself or Andre at this time. Any questions? Yes, ma'am, Connie. Say it again.
How do you get over your child committing suicide?
How do you get, I think the question was, how do you get over your child committing suicide or taking their life? The answer to that is you don't. It's not about getting over. You can ask the same question about how do you get over losing your mother, losing your son, losing your father. You don't get over that. That's a new part of you. And stop trying to get over it. You just want to get through it. You understand, and you want to be better day by day. You want to be at a place where you get to a point where you are remembering and connecting with the positive memories of that loved one. You know, you don't want to focus on, sometimes we get caught in the activity. So we're caught up in the concept of they took their life. And we have a lot of issues with that from a religious standpoint and from other things. That's our issue that we're caught up in. But that person could have lost his life through gunfire. He could have lost his life through an accident. He could have lost his life through a health challenge. The point is that the person is gone. And so what we want to do is focus on the whole aspect of the beauty of that life and where and the impact that it had on us and memory things that you can do. So some things when you're dealing with grief and loss, some of the things you do, there's a thing that you go back and forth through. So an example is that, you know, a person, I'll say if a loved one was there and you had a room that, and now you're redecorating, you're doing some things. And sometimes if you go out and you may go to the mailbox, you get some mail out and it's addressed to that loved one that's gone away. So that may become a trigger of, okay, that's my loved one that's gone, I got that mail. But then at the same time, you walk back into the house and you smell the smell of fresh paint. Okay, that's a trigger of moving forward. That's something that's new. And so the point is that you have to understand that it's about honoring, you know, and some, I don't care how good or bad or whatever, you honor the love relationship you had with your loved one. And you focus on that piece of it, and you do your best to get through the loss, but you don't focus on I'm going to get, you don't ever want to get over. Because the point is that person is always a part of it. Sometimes when we put that language, getting over, is almost like, how do I forget it, or how I get it out of my mind, or how, you know, it's gonna be, and it takes time. And everyone's time is their own time. Some people will say, well, your child been gone for 5 years now, you ought to be over that by now. No. It's not about that. That person is a significant part of your life, and they will always be there. And it's important that you allow it. Very good question. I hope that answered it a little bit. Any other questions? Okay. So before I dismiss you, I did want to say this. See this and this. I wanted to share this with you. Again, there were so many different angles we wanted to talk about. I talked about suicide. And so what I want you to understand is some of the warning signs that's there. Hopelessness, feeling there is no way out, anxiety, agitation, sleeplessness, mood swings, feelings of no reason to live, that we not talk about that in the biblical piece with some of the biblical characters, rage, anger, engaging in risky activity without thinking, increased alcohol or drug misuse, withdrawing from family and friends. So those are some warning signs. Risk factors are a prior suicide attempt, meaning that if there's been people in your life that have attempted suicide, that normalizes it somewhat. So that's a risk factor. If you have someone that experienced that, mental health conditions, someone's struggling with that, stressful life events, whether it's a divorce, job loss, financial crisis, death of a loved one, availability of lethal means. That's a risk factor. If there's guns around the house, that's a risk factor. Death of relative, friend by suicide, that's a risk factor. Social isolation. Someone's all to themselves all the time, that's a risk factor. Chronic disease and disability. That's also a risk factor. But just as important as us recognizing risk factors, we also need to recognize protective factors. Protective factors are positive coping skills. They're being able to do some of the things that we've talked about. Those are coping skills. Having a reason for living or a sense of purpose in life, helping a person kind of process through that, and therapy can help that as well. Feeling connections. When we talked about trauma is basically disconnect from a social disconnect. Access to mental health care, cultural, religious, and personal beliefs that discourage suicide. So there's several things that's out there that we can, hopefully at some point we can continue the dialogue, continue the discussion. Actually, this could have been an all-day event very easily. Yes, sir.
With some people, the sense of failure is a very important part of the whole. Failure in so many ways, and then not hearing people value, or should I say, being appreciative of you, that resonates. And if a person does not think well of themselves initially, and they're not told that you are somebody, okay, but then it takes time for them to allow that to resonate in their, mindset.
Yeah.
So failure is a big part of the whole.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. So when we're looking at that, that kind of falls in line because it can lead to a sense of hopelessness because, okay, I'm not able to accomplish what I set out to accomplish. So therapy, as well as you, can help a person understand and appreciate that a little bit better because, see, failure instead of looking at being the end all, it's the beginning. It's like, okay, that was a stepping stone to my next step. Okay, I tried to do this, so one or two things. How do I reassess? Am I at a position where I'm ready to try the same thing again and utilize my failures to try to do better the next time, or am I at a point to recognize that, okay, this is maybe I should move in a different direction. This is not something that's really suited for me or what have you. So sometimes you can look at it in that regard. But another piece that Brother Fenton mentioned is the fact that the lack of appreciation. There's a thing that I often say, and we talk about this in the concept of when I'm doing presentations with a faith-based organization, is church hurt. And we talk about that. And one of the things is there's a difference in feeling and being valuable and feeling valued. There's a significant difference. Now, and I give you a case in point. As we were preparing to come into this setting here, before you all got here, you may have saw it, but you may not have seen it. It was Antoine and Mike and Ron. They were just frantically working up here, getting this projector together. And if you notice, I was looking at that projector a good bit today. I wasn't intending to. I was intending to pay attention to this one, but because it was ready to go, I used it. And so they are very valuable people that did some good work. And Mike up there, and I think Mindy may be back there working on something. They're all doing work. They're very valuable. We would not have the same experience today if it wasn't for some of the work that they're doing. But are they valued? I'm not saying that they're not. That's just, I'm proposing a question. And the way you show their value, to know that if they're valued, is how you show it. Is one thing, and first of all, at a minimum, you thank them. At a minimum, you recognize what it is that they're doing. You show appreciation for it, but then there's many other ways that you can help them feel valued so they can wake up and get up here early, because most folks like that, even folks that put on this presentation, they had to get here. They wanted us all here at 9, but they had to be here before 9 in order to meet us at 9. So it's a process and all of that. So that all of that weighs into your mental health. So very good. Thank you for sharing that. Any other thoughts or questions? Uh-oh, got one over here. I'm trying to get them out here, Don. It's their fault. I'm trying to let her go. She said I wasn't going to say nothing, but.
Okay, on the news,
Yes.
COVID is associated with increases in mental health.
Absolutely.
Can you, 1, 2, 3, some of the triggers
Oh, yeah.
that occurred in COVID?
Absolutely. All right, you're gonna get me started. I'm trying to not get started today, but that's a very good question, and actually all of the stuff that we're talking about, a lot of it is post-COVID. A lot of the things have come as a result of COVID. So some of the things that we're talking about is, for instance, number one, when COVID happened, the whole world shut down. There was a lot of anxiety and fear, for one. And then some of the other things that happened with COVID is that we went into isolation. That's another, if you notice, a warning sign, a trigger that I talked about. Now, even now, my wife and I work from home. Since COVID, we've never gone back to work. We still work. That's great in a lot of ways. Great for me, love it, but it's not great for everybody. Yeah, for some people they're in isolation. That was their social connection by going to work and connecting with people, and that's something that's continuing to happen, and people are fearful. It's just like COVID had kind of diminished, but it's now on the rise, and we have seen several people here with masks on. That fear still is prevalent. And those are some of the things that we look at. So we're in a society that can be at a certain place, and if we get a family member, especially an elderly family member, that can become devastating and overwhelming in that regard. So thank you for bringing that up. We don't have time to go too much further. Dawn got the whip out, so I got to give her this mic. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate you so much.
Give them a hand. They did a great job. All right, so now we're going to do our raffle giveaway. So everybody get your tickets out, multicolored tickets. We got, 3 more prizes, ladies? We have 4 more prizes. One of them includes the largest air fryer we got back there, right? Okay. So I'm going to turn over to Nicole and let Nicole and Sister Fleming and Sister Bean, you guys